Alright, hi guys. Welcome back to Intro to iOS Development. This is our third lecture, and today we're going to be talking about navigation, MVC, and delegation. So one thing we wanted to touch on first is I know a couple of you came into office hours or put code like this up on Piazza. This is just like constraint error code, and basically it's telling you that you've set like overlapping constraints on an object so that they can't be satisfied at the same time. But if you like copy and paste this error log into this website up there, it'll give you like this nice visualization of like the rules that you've set, and then you can kind of figure out which one you don't want from there. And then just to touch on, we talked about programmatic auto layout last week, but there's actually some other ways to do UI in iOS. So one of them, the one on the left, is called frame-based, and you can kind of see, you basically specify like a rectangle as its frame, and that's like the position that it should be in, as well as its height and width. And then you can also use storyboards, which is the method on the right, where you set width and height kind of like on this like user interface looking thing. There are obviously ways to do it, but they're a little bit either like not as easy to do relative auto layout, which is what we use programmatic for. And storyboards can get really difficult when you're working on really large projects or trying to share them across multiple people, which is why we like to teach programmatic auto layout. So some more announcements. Extensions should be requested at least 24 hours in advance for your projects. So like if it's due on Sunday night, you should do it before Saturday night. With the exception of like a super like emergency, and then try not to abuse this right, because we have the right to like deny you an extension if you try to ask for one too many times. And just to make sure that it's seen, don't email us about this, and make sure you do a private post on Piazza. That way all instructors can see it. And if you do need to email about like something else, you should use this email, courses@cornellappdev.com, instead of our personal emails. And now we're going to do review of last week's lecture. So how would you center a UI view in the center of the screen? So my UI view is called My View. Yeah. So A would do the center X position. So that would center it horizontally on the screen. So you actually need one more. Yeah, E. So the answer is A and C. So that's something that's a little annoying about the auto layout. You have to do X and Y for the center position. Does that make sense? Cool. And now we're going to move on to today's content.
Yeah, so I guess like a lot of what we talked about in the last lecture was just generally like presenting your views on a view controller. But I guess how do you create like multiple views throughout your view, like your app? So like let's say Instagram, you want to present like a profile view controller. How exactly do you present another one? And so how we do that within iOS is creating a UI navigation controller. And what exactly happens is you create the models for different view controllers and you push and pop off of your stack. How many of people are like familiar with stacks in general? Pretty much it's just like a list of view controllers that you're presenting and taking away from your views. And I guess these are the more technical, like the actual code that you would use to push and pop off of your stack. And so, for example, we have like your photo albums. I think this is like iTunes. But like, if you want to present something just like push something onto your stack, you would push in this way, and it would present like from, I guess, left to right or right to left, horizontally. And that's how that would work. And essentially, what's happening behind the scenes is that you have this navigation view, and it's holding all your different view controllers. So like this is the view of one specific view controller, and if you push something onto it, let's say this were like clickable and you could go onto like another view that presented Cupertino's time, it would pretty much just like overlay onto that view. Another way of presenting is from bottom up, and so that would just push another view controller on, but it would not have its own stack. So it would not be able to remember like which one, like if this was like third in the order or whatnot. And this is how that would look. You guys may be also familiar with this interaction, but it just comes up from the bottom and displays on top. And this does not own its own stack as well, so like you can't have like different orders. And I guess like a specific architecture that we like to use within iOS is the model view controller. Is anyone familiar with these terminologies? Yeah, so pretty much like how we like to break down everything is that there is the model, which represents like all the data that's going to be used throughout your app. So like, I don't know, like a user model or I don't know, a new page model or whatever. And then there's the view, which actually presents all the views that are used within your app. And then there's a controller that's essentially the middleman throughout it. So it takes the data from the model and passes it to the views and says, here's what you need to present. And the view handles that. So controller pretty much handles all the logic within your app. And so, for example, like we have Ithaca Transit, like let's say you want to present a certain bus stop or a route, like the model would handle all the information that's stored within those objects, and the view would take in that information and display it. But the controller would be the middleman saying, okay, what kind of information do we want to pass to the view? If the user updates the view or like taps on something, you update the model and then it passes through the controller again and updates the view. So yeah, essentially like the controller is the middleman for all that. But let's say you also want to communicate through like between different view controllers. I guess the MVC wouldn't exactly help with that because like who's going to communicate to different controllers. So we use delegation. Pretty much you pass information through view controllers and you're conforming to protocols that specify like what kind of information would need to be relayed. And to put in perspective, if anyone's like used Java, it's similar to interfaces where one object can conform to a protocol and other objects can call those functions that are within that protocol. So a little like analogy is, let's say you're at a restaurant and so there are three different objects like the chef, the customer, and the menu. So the chef knows how to make the items in the menu, and the customer wants to order those specific items on the menu. And essentially the menu is the protocol that but it's the contract that both know like exactly what's going to go on, but they don't exactly care what's happening on the other side. So yeah, I guess this is like a little example, but like within code, what would happen is there's this protocol that specifies like what exactly is on the menu. So like, let's say there's like a function that says make steak, or this would essentially be an item on the menu that is steak. And the customer has some understanding of like there's a delegate that knows how to make steak, which is in this case the chef. And so whenever the customer wants to order a steak, they just call delegate.makeSteak. And the corresponding chef, then conforms to that protocol that says, I understand how to make a steak. And I guess in this code it says print cooking steak, but there would be some more logic in there to handle that information. And we'll go a little deeper into like more examples with this throughout the code. But yeah, I guess this is a little like this is what would happen. So like if you have a chef and they conform to this protocol, then you can pass it into the customer and say, this is your new delegate. This is who's going to be, you have a point of reference to access all these different like menu items. And whenever the customer wants to order a steak, they just call that function. And a little deeper into like protocols, pretty much anyone who conforms to this protocol is able to call these functions. So like another view controller could, for example, here we have a change color delegate, which just changes a certain label's background color. There could be like 5 different view controllers that conform to it, and every single one of those, if they are appointed as the delegate, then they could be called, and this code could be ran on their end. And in terms of setting the delegates, like the property tends to be a public property on the view controller. And so when you're instantiating, let's say this view controller wants to be able to call a delegate function. So for our example, this view controller wants to be able to make a steak. Then they would call, or the other view controller wants to be able to make a steak. Then the other view controller, you would say, I am your delegate. And whenever you want to make a steak, call delegate.makeSteak. And we see this here. Sorry, this code is like did change color, but it's essentially the same concept of whenever this view controller is instantiated, it has access to this delegate object, and it makes it or calls whatever function is in the protocol. This is, yeah, sorry.
So when you're working between two view controllers, when you assign the delegate for one view controller to the other view controller, what does that enable the other view controller to do?
So if we take the example of the chef and the customer, let's say in this case we would instantiate the customer with a corresponding delegate. So if we go back to this code, like we created the customer object or view controller with a corresponding delegate, and so what that says is the customer will store this delegate object, which is the chef, and whenever it needs to access that, it'll say delegate dot order steak.
Like it makes sense in this analogy, but if you consider like say one screen and another screen, if one screen is covering the other screen, what does it matter if the other screen changes? Like what if why does it matter if one screen has the delegate controls over the other screen?
Are you like asking why you want communication between like two different view controls?
Yeah, I guess.
So like examples like maybe like you have a controller, like home view controller, you push something. Alright, so one example is like in the assignment you're gonna have this week is like you have a playlist, right? Playlist of songs. If you tap on it, what we want to do is push a view controller that allows you to maybe like edit information about the song, like a name of the song, order of the song, whatever. And then when we go back, we want to be able to update that how it looks like in the home view controller. And so in that case, you want to take the information that you put in the second view controller and pass that back to the home view.
So the editing view controller would have access to like the
Yeah, so you would also have to
controllers.
pass that information from the home view controller to the edit view controller.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And delegation tends to be a very, very complicated and weird thing to grasp. So we'll go like through a big demo for this, but feel free to ask any questions as we go along, especially if it's very confusing. Yeah, so I guess this is a little more technical on how exactly we set the delegate, and whenever we want to call the delegate functions. Usually they're set up in the initialization of the new view controller. We'll go through this at the end, that's fine. But yeah, let's get started on the demo code. This is not the right thing. So did anyone download the starter code? We should have it on the website. But if you haven't, go to our website and download the starter code. It should be a .txt file. But we're going to quickly run through making a new project from scratch just because it tends to be quite annoying to deal with. Does everyone have it? Just quickly. Okay, so we're going to quickly make a new app. Let's say we want to make it lecture 3. It's going to complain to me because I already have a lecture 3 on my desktop.
Make sure they have these right.
And make sure we have Swift and Storyboard checked off. If you have any of these, it's like fine. It'll just add a bunch of random things you're not going to use. But make sure we have Swift and Storyboard selected. If anyone's lagging behind, please raise your hand. I'm going to try and run through this a little quicker than we usually do. Create the project. And then the usual setup. Does anyone in here have only the app delegate and no scene delegate?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go through both lines of code. So for the scene delegate, I honestly do not remember it ever, but I'm just going to copy and paste it.
Make your text bigger.
This is clear. So, yeah, I don't know. We ran through this last lecture, but just copy and paste this stuff. I'll leave it up for a minute. Sorry?
Navigation controller.
Talk about this.
So yeah, one new thing that we have in here is the navigation controller, and so we talked about it a little bit, but this is essentially what's going to allow you to add more view controllers to your stack, right? And we'll go through this it'll be a little clearer as we go through our demo, but we'll eventually want to be able to present other view controllers in several ways. So that's why we embed our normal view controller, which just presents its view within a UI navigation controller. I'll leave this on for a tiny bit longer. And we'll go through the app delegate code for, yeah, I got you. Does everyone have it or need more time? Everyone's got it? All right. So if you do not,
Delete.
so if you do not have it, then this will, for everyone who has seen delegate, just ignore this for 2 seconds. So you're just gonna copy and paste this code in here and make sure to add var window as its, and its corresponding type is UI window. They essentially do very similar, they have very similar logic. It's just iOS 13 changed stuff with like scenes versus like just one window for your whole entire app. I'll leave this up for a sec. Just let me know whenever you're good and we'll continue. Also, so the starter code that we have on the website is just a regular .text file. The reason we wanted to do this is to go through this again, and also just make sure you're gonna be like copying and pasting that into what we have. So like we're not starting completely from scratch, because we want to go through a lot of the delegation stuff this lecture. Does everyone have that downloaded and ready to go? Dope. So we'll go through that. So make sure to just copy and paste part 1 into your regular view controller. One very small thing is do not take either this parentheses or this parentheses out, because it will most probably break. But just copy and paste over the view.did_load function. And then it should work fine. And the next thing is we're going to actually create a new file. Yeah. Yeah, just copy over the view.did_load. Yeah, the entire function, just erase it and copy over it, but not the big, like the larger enclosing parentheses. Brackets. And now we're going to create another view controller. We're just going to call it modal view controller. If you don't
new
have
file,
yeah, sorry.
and then you select Cocoa Touch class. Yeah.
So we're going to select Cocoa Touch class and create modal view controller. And make sure it's a subclass of UI view controller. Language should automatically be a Swift. And then you just create that. You can also just create click create, so it should be fine. And just copy in that part 2 for your modal view controller. Yeah.
Go back to like the subclass and what the subclass was for that file.
UI view controller.
UI view controller, yeah. Wait, this is the starter. Does everyone have this downloaded and ready to go? Anyone lagging behind? Kevin or Gonzalo, can you guys help out real quick? Wait, what the hell? Copied over this. All right.
Quit your project.
Where did my project go? Dope. So what we're gonna start with is you'll see that we have some functions that are kind of left open, or I guess not filled. You'll also most probably run into an error. It'll say that on this line, title string is not a variable that we have yet. Just comment that out for now. We're gonna run through it a little later. But if you go into view controller and we run this app, what we'll see is that we have, hopefully this runs. We should have two buttons, one saying push navigation VC and another one saying present modal VC. And so as we talked about a little earlier, we have two different ways of presenting new view controllers. So we'll go through the push navigation VC first. And so does anyone remember like exactly how we do this? We'll run through this right now, but just kidding. We're gonna start with the modal view controller. So if we want to present a new view controller modally, which is like from the bottom up, we already have this new view controller called modal view controller, and we can simply go into our code in present modal view controller and just create let VC equals modal view controller. This will instantiate a new object of this class, and what we want to do is call present, or is it self.present, and you'll see here we want to fill in the view controller to present is going to be VC, which is our new view controller that we're creating. Animated we can put in true, completion we'll put in nil. You guys will most probably not be needing this for the scope of these projects. But if we put this in and we run it, just kidding, we forgot to delete main.storyboard, which is our usual process. Never have storyboard in here. If anyone remembers, so if you can just delete main.storyboard and then within your info.p list, just go through this whole thing and delete, just kidding, this one, storyboard name, we can delete that one, and it'll run fine. Actually, it ran fine without it. It was good practice. Hello? Yeah. Okay. After I copy part. Kevin, can you help real quick? Wait.
Go to scene delegate. Go to info playlist. Main story.
Okay. Why did that not work before? All right. So now that we have this code, if we press this button, we'll see that we have our new view controller presents from the bottom.
Yeah.
My modal view controller line has an unresolved identifier error.
So is that the line that says dot text equals string?
No. It's let VC equal modal view controller.
Okay. We'll go back to that code really quickly. Yeah, it's does anyone else have the view controller actually presenting? Or do we want to go? Okay, so a few people. Does anyone not have the view controller presenting? Okay, Gonzalo, can you help? Sorry, I'm going to try and run through this a little quicker. Is Yana helping you guys? Okay. I won't speed up too fast. But yeah, if we go back to what we have actually presented, what this is doing is it's saying instantiate this view controller and just display it on top of what we have. But we noticed that we don't have a UI navigation controller within it. Like when we instantiated it, we just created the blank view controller, so we can't exactly present something on top of it because it doesn't have its own navigation stack. And to pretty much make it disappear, I think what we can do in here is we would call dismiss view controller, or dismiss, and it's called animated true. No, you can also put false in there. It just looks less cool. So this is just to quickly dismiss your view controller within the actual, so like within the red view controller. To dismiss it, which is the function that's corresponding to this button, you would just call dismiss animated true completion no. Oh, I don't know why this isn't running. I didn't rerun it. Just kidding. So now if we present it and press this button, it should dismiss it. Is everyone up to this point so far? Sorry, this one's like a very confusing lecture, so like don't feel bad at all if you're like lagging behind, or I guess like not getting any of the code that I'm writing. Okay, so hopefully all the TAs are helping with that. But I guess we'll go into more of like the delegation conversation now. So you'll notice that this button says dismiss and save text. So what we want to do with this view controller is that if you see on the other view controller, we want to be able to change the name. And so how we do that is when we present this, we want to be able to input a new name. I'll put an actual reasonable name. And we want to be able to save it, and it presents the new name on the view controller behind it, right? And so how we would do that is through delegation. And so what happens is we want to declare a new protocol. We want to capitalize. So we want to create a new protocol within the presenting view controller. So in this case, it's going to be like, for our old example, it's going to be the chef that creates the protocol. But so if we go into our view controller.swift, we create this new protocol called save new name protocol. And we create a new function called like save new name, and we pass in a corresponding string to update the title, right? Is everyone at this part? Okay. And so what we want to do is within the modal view controller, we want to be able to instantiate it with this corresponding delegate. So we want to say that our base view controller is going to be the delegate for this new view controller. And the reason why is because when we dismiss it, we want to be able to say delegate.saveNewName, and it's going to like take in the text that we want. We're going to get to this part in a sec, but so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a new init with a corresponding delegate, which is going to be new name delegate, or no, new name protocol. The name is not there. Oh, okay. And we're going to call super.init. Since this is a view controller, you just have to call the super.initializer. You can just pass in no for both of those. And we're going to want to store this new delegate on the actual view controller. But one thing that's specific to delegates is that we want to make it a weak variable. What? That has a class bound. Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Conform to class. Okay, so we have to add in that the protocol conforms to class. I didn't know this was an error. It used to just be a warning. Hopefully this is fine. Okay, so we are now going to store this new weak variable on delegates. Something you guys don't exactly have to know the technical details behind it, but the reason we make it weak is because we don't want it to persist through like the life cycle of something memory related, I honestly don't know. We'll just make it a weak variable. And then within our initializer, we're going to accept this delegate field, and we're just going to set self.delegate equals delegate. Also, this error tends to pop up. Just click fix, and it'll fix it for you. It has something to do with like decoding your view controller and like saving it to like other encoded data, but like you don't have to deal with that at all. And so now we see within this view controller, we have access to a variable called delegate, right? And so now whenever we want to call this function called save new name, we can just pass in a string, right? And now it's under the assumption that whoever passed in this delegate is going to be able to run this line of code on their end. So for our case, it's going to be view controller. Does anyone know what exactly we want to pass in here? So like for our case, we have this text field and it takes in text, and we want to be able to pass it to the other view controller. So for this, we would do just text field dot text. For now, we're just gonna should I force unwrap? Maybe we won't. Actually, it's just easiest. You guys should never do this, but for this demo, just unwrap. But yeah, so we're gonna assume that there is text within the text field, and we're going to pass it to this delegate, right? And so now what happens is if we go into the view controller, when we're creating this modal view controller, it should give us an error saying that we're not passing in a delegate. So what we're gonna do is pass in this new delegate argument, and we're gonna call self. What this is saying is that this view controller is claiming that it will conform to the protocol, save new name protocol, and it will be able to like handle all the functions of it. Right now we haven't written the code for that, so it's gonna shout at us. So we're gonna click this pretty much what we're gonna do is extension of view controller, and we're gonna make it conform to save new name protocol. I don't know what the hell that just fixed. I just did that. And so now we're saying that we want the view controller to conform to this new protocol or the contract between these two. It'll give you all the corresponding stubs or like the functions that it needs to be able to handle. For right now, we're just gonna type print save new name just so we can see the functionality within the code. So after everyone's gone to this point, what's going to happen is that when this modal view controller is being instantiated, it's going to have it knows that it has a delegate object that conforms to this protocol. It has no clue what exactly that object is. All it knows is it's technically a class. So when it clicks this dismiss and save text, we see in our console that this function runs and prints out save new name. And so this is essentially like the communication between these two view controllers, right? So the modal view controller has said delegate.save new name, and it assumes that whoever the delegate is can actually perform this function. And on the other hand, the delegate or the old view controller runs its own implementation. And so on this end, we want to actually reflect that change into the text field, right? So we want to update the present modal view controller button dot text or title. And so we'll essentially just do present modal view controller dot set title, and we'll pass in the new name for dot normal. This should be somewhat familiar from the last lecture, but if anyone's having issues, let us know. But if we do this, also remember we force unwrapped, so like please no one pass in empty strings because it'll complain. But if we pass in a new name, you'll see that it updated the name on the old view controller. Does that kind of make sense on like how this communication channel is happening through the delegation? Okay, So I guess that like kind of encompasses like modal presentation, the delegation. Now another thing we have is the pushing onto the navigation stack. So let's say we want a different view controller. We'll create a new file, and it'll be blue view controller. And we'll still have, I don't know what, oh, that was the issue. It's a subclass of UI view controller, still language is Swift. We're just gonna create it. And let's say all we want this to do is just have like background. Oh my god. Can't type. Ugh. Blue. There, we finally got it. And all we want it to be is just like a blue view controller. It does nothing. And so if we go into view controller, this button is currently set up to run this function. And so all we have to do is do the same thing. Let VC equals blue view controller, instantiate it. And then instead of calling present, which we did for present modal view controller, we can just call push. Oh, just kidding. Navigation controller dot push. Just kidding. VC, same thing for animated. And so if we remember, this UI navigation controller was what's handling like the stack of view controllers. And so that's why we have to call it. You'll notice that we also have optional chaining. So technically, like not every view controller will have its own stack, which is what exactly happens here. But since we instantiated it with a navigation controller in our scene delegate, then it works out. Sorry, I'll go back to the right code. We have its own stack. And so if we run this, what this will do is you'll see here, it pushes it on from left to right. We'll call it left. But you'll also notice that it has this navigation bar. So this comes in, I guess, by default with navigation controllers, and it has some back button to like keep track of like what is the most previously presented view controller, hence like the logic of the stack. And so this, you technically don't have to create your own dismiss function. I guess you could override the navigation bar if you really want to, but like by default, it has its own back button functionality. And you could present more and more on top of it, and it handles like the different, like the order of all the different view controllers. We still have this functionality. Is there anything I'm missing? What else do we have to go to?
Setting that text to be whatever the button says already.
We have that.
No, like when you click on it, no, the red one. It should have AS whatever in there.
Oh, okay. So now let's say we wanted to present what the, okay, so we'll go back. Oh, I played myself. Let's say within our red view controller, we want this button to have the text of what the current title is. So like, right now it's presented as title. We want to be able to pass in that corresponding string to this button, right? And so you'll notice actually that's what was shouting at us here. Text field.text equals title string. This is the information we want to be passing in. So when we're going from one view controller that's presenting the next, so if we think of the view controller as the parent and the one that we're presenting as the child, we can just directly pass it through the initializer function. And we did that with the delegate. And so one other thing we can add in here is we can do title string, which is of type string. I guess we can make it, we don't have to make it optional. But we'll store a variable called title string. It'll be of type string. That's fine without it being optional. But now we want to call self.titleString equals title string. And this is going to be passed in whenever you initialize this new view controller. So if we go back into, Just kidding. Make this optional so it doesn't shadow us. Make this optional too. But if we go back into our regular view controller, it should shadow us again, saying that we're not passing in this corresponding title string. And so what we'll want to do is we'll want to pass in what we currently have as the title of the present mode of view controller button. That's a super long title. But we'll just want to do title label text. I think, yeah. And we'll want to pass in what the current title is to the new modal view controller. And so if we do this, our last thing is we uncomment this string. Actually, just kidding. We want to make it the button title. No, we'll make it the text field title. So now what's going to happen is if we run this, we'll see that when we have this, it just inputs this. Oh, I played myself. It puts this as like the placeholder text. Does the text field have placeholder? It does. And so that's how the information is passed from the parent to the child. And then if we were to change this, new title, we go back. And then what do you think happens if we go back to this new view controller? Right. It has new title in here. And it's pretty much just taking whatever it is, the title of this button, passing it to this new view controller, and creating the view with this as the like stand-in text. Is one cool nifty thing you could do is I think you can just do placeholder instead. I guess this is a little more common for like stand-in text, but you don't want people to be able to submit it. You'll notice that it'll be like a little more grayed out and just represents like a normal placeholder. But yeah. What else are we forgetting? Does anyone have questions so far? Does everyone understand like delegation? I think that tends to be like a very, I guess, confusing part. Just like the idea of like conforming to the protocol and like who calls what. Is everyone, I guess, like somewhat solid on that part? Dope. There isn't much else I guess we wanted to go through. Yeah, so I guess that concludes the demo. Is everyone up to this part?
Does anyone need to see certain parts of the code again? Like the whole thing will be up online later, but like just for right now.
The last line I think that you wrote in present level.
Yeah. So yeah, what we had added in was passing in the new title string. Yeah, I guess for our case, we made it so that it always has to be passed in with the title string. You could technically like enforce that it's like a nil or like not always have to pass it in, but yeah, we just wanted to like, I guess, explain the logic of like passing information through different view controllers. Great. Yeah, I guess there wasn't exactly too much else we wanted to go through. We'll also have this up on the website and also a lecture video that has all of my screen recording. So we'll go back to like some small logistical things. We'll present this. Sorry, did you catch the end of it? I hope I didn't go too fast. Okay. Good. Yeah. So Project 3, it should already be released on the website, and it is due by this coming Sunday night. Also, some small thing is, one thing we tend to notice on Piazza, I don't know if this was too common this semester so far, but a very, very common issue that people run with in iOS development is dealing with this signal Sigabert. Who knows what this even means, but this pretty much just says the code crashed. And so this is kind of hard to debug on our side, especially if we don't know what you've coded up or where it crashed or whatnot. And so what tends to help us a little more is actually, okay, let me make a crash real quick on here just to just help out with that. Where can I make this crash?
Did you unwrap?
Yeah.
That's just gonna
So this will, I don't know how to, I don't know. It's pretty much like,
uncomment. Put that back. And
This
uncomment
back.
translates.
comment translates.
I don't know if it'll crash. But
No,
yeah,
that won't
error
crash.
console.
So this will tend to have error console. What you will want to do is pretty much just like scroll to the top until there's like this termination app due to there will be a more reasonable explanation than this last line, which says terminating with uncaught exception. This will give you a little bit more detail, and if you post this, we'll have a little bit more context to be able to help you. It also tends to help if you like post a little snippet of your code where you think it could be crashing. But yeah, that's like, I guess, just one less question we could ask you. It'll give us a little more context to be able to help you more immediately. But yeah, I guess there wasn't too much else we want to go through. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, you guys are 8 minutes early. I don't know. Is everyone comfortable with what we went over today? Dope. Yeah. Hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Prelim season's annoying as hell. Hope you guys are all doing well. But yeah, thank you for coming out today.